Hello, everyone. Welcome to MD Media's weekly show, the H panel. The H panel discusses every week with the panelists on issues that are pertaining to Ethiopia and the Horn Africa in general. Today, we have the topic: Is Tigray still and effectively part of Ethiopia? That's a question we will be asking. As usual, we'll be talking about the topic, but we will be starting with what stood out for each panelist. Uh, Faisal, what stood out for you this week? You are muted, Faisal.
Sorry. Um, I think what stood out for me this week is the complete disarray in the Somali region. Complete disarray. You can say the Somali region is not in a combat war as you have in Tigray and in Oromia, but the region is literally in a disarray. The famine that has been neglected for too long is now seeping deep into the social fabric, where it's really just a question of when and whether the people will ever recover from the devastation. The number of livestock lost by the Somali region, and of course, some Oromo areas, and the devastation of the agricultural sector is just biblical. So I don't know how that can be handled. There is no plan, no effort in the horizon to even address that. Having said that, the traditional corruption that used to be also part of the political scheme in the area has taken a new height. It's really wreaking havoc on the social fabric again. You have massive bribery of every step, even to bring water pipe or tap water to your place, to even pay your electric bill. You have to bribe somebody so that they can accept what you are paying and not levy extra on you. The extortion that is exacted against businessmen and women is again a high proportional level. And cronyism, which was always an issue that people pointed, is now out of hand. And nepotism is really as present in that region as religion, Islam is. As a matter of fact, even Abiy himself, with all his shortcomings, at least realized that the Somali region is experiencing corruption level that has never been seen in the area. What do all this bring to the region? The combined effect of this is literally to say today that the Somali region is contained. It's no longer governed. There is no system of governance that's really going on. It's just simply a containment region with land grabbing at its highest. I mean, people talked about land grabbing in Oromia region, in Addis Ababa region, in the Somali region during Abdi Ilay's time. This time, land grabbing is just unspoken, unheard, to a point where governmental institutional land is being grabbed and given to people for personal gains. As I say, the region is no longer, governed; it's just contained, and the methods of containment is again feeding the corruption. The way the region is contained so that upheaval or some sort of uprising doesn't take place is the regional government is bribing some of the powerful ministers within the government by giving them and allotting them more districts in their area. So a minister that you want to contain and hold and be on your side, you will give extra judicial districts that were not certified by the current parliament or the sitting parliament. And that's creating itself another huge issue. The second thing that's really breaking that region, and I want everybody to really pay attention to this as we go from today onward, is what Somalis are calling the the Western City region. City region is west of Dredawa, which is a Somali region bordering Afar. Over 4,000 Somalis have been killed, massacred, as they are saying, by Afar militia. It has been documented, and Somalis have been literally kicked out of the districts with the help of Afar militia and Afar paramilitary groups. And the president of the region doesn't want to lift a finger for good or bad, because he believes that if he fights against the Afar, who are the darling of Abiy at this particular time, he may lose his seat. So because of that, there is a revolt and upheaval taking place west of Dredawa and Shinile and all the areas that Somali clan group lives. The Isa people are really in revolt against the regional government. So now there is a conversation, because the regional government cannot bring solution to these people, be it through the federal government or through the local government. Basically, they are spreading false information to say, let the Isas take care of themselves. So here is a government who is telling its own people, instead of saying, we can defend you legally or militarily, they're basically telling them, defend yourself along tribal lines. And that's really breaking the morale of a lot of Somalis in the region, who basically are saying that region, the Isa Somali region, could even seek its own method to get out of this quagmire, whether that method is to secede it from the Somali region or to strike their own deals with Afar, we don't know. But there is such a disappointment that in the last 2 days there has been demonstration. There have been demonstrations against both Abiy and the regional government, and they have been chanting down Abiy, down Abiy, down Mustafa Akshar, down Mustafa Akshar. And with that, I conclude by saying that even 360, which used to support Mustafa for right or wrong, are now calling him as part of the greater web of what they call kidnapping of Amara people in the Somali region, and there I will stop.
Okay, thank you, Faisal. Gail, what is the highlight for you over the past week?
Not any particular issue. I think what the conflict in the city region and the protest in the Somali region, which started in Jijiga, was then put down by force. These are really significant indications of where the country is and where the people are. That the economic, military, diplomatic, and uh, war situation in the country is reaching a boiling point, and that people are beginning to express themselves one way or the other. So that is indicative. In that line, where the country is around the state of affairs within Ethiopia, what stood out for me or what surprised me, um, it's about two occasions in which two distinct voices were heard that graphically demonstrated the state of affairs in the country. One is a voice of morality, sympathy, and dignity, heard from the University of California at Berkeley School of Information. The other is the voice of decadence, of callousness, and depravity that was heard in Ethiopia. Both voices represent people who were mentioned, I guess, about 2 weeks ago in the time 100 most influential people in the world. One for her positive influence as a computer scientist specializing in intelligence, artificial intelligence, for what the potentially she can do to improve the human condition. The other is for its negative influence in Ethiopia, represented by Abiy Ahmed. So what I heard from the voice of morality, sympathy, and dignity from the computer scientist Timnit, that she took the opportunity that she was given to speak to raise the war in Tigray. Why do I call that this is a voice of morality, sympathy, and dignity? It is that she characterized the war in Tigray for what it is. There is no technicality, there is no legality. It is a genocide. She called it a genocide. She described it in front of intelligent people who can understand what she was talking about, that what was going on in Tigray is a genocide and the world is just standing by. Even though we live in the post-World War II period where the international community that existed in 1946 developed this motto called never again, but it comes back, genocide comes back in all forms, but the world finds its technical, in the legalistic way, not to describe it genocide, but she did. That's a voice of morality. Second, she compared the war in Ukraine, that the world is paying attention to, the most attention given to, with the war in Tigray. And there she tried to put the Tigray war in perspective, that the deadliest war in the world today is in Tigray, but the world is concerned about a war that happened in Europe. That is the voice of sympathy for the people of Tigray, for the downtrodden, for the oppressed. That's a voice of sympathy. But she also spoke about her profession and how her profession is really important for human beings to understand the common humanity that we have. That is, that the world is interdependent, more so today than any time in the past, that it is interconnected. What happens in Tigray is not going to remain in Tigray. What happens in Tigray is going to come and haunt the entire world. So this is a warning, but it's a voice of dignity, human dignity, that we have that common humanity and we cannot stand, that the world cannot stand by the wayside and observe while genocide is being committed. So there was a voice of one of the most influential people in the world that speaks with clarity to the morality and sympathy and dignity of that position of being an influential person, the most influential person in the world. Thank God that voices like this actually exist in a world that is defined by only political calculation and calculation of self-interest, nothing else. The other voice is one that represents the government of Abiy, who was selected for his notoriety. And that was played out this week in Ethiopia. One example for that is that the spokesperson for the government of Ethiopia spoke to journalists about the state of affairs in the country. But in that question, he was asked about why journalists are being imprisoned in Ethiopia. We know that 20 most well-known journalists are in prison. It's not a joke. That's their profession. They're journalists. We know them by name, one by one. They're journalists, and good ones at that. And they're in prison, and they're paraded before the court. We know that major correspondents of major newspapers in the world, like the New York Times, The Economist, their correspondents from Ethiopia were expelled. We know that. It's a fact. But when asked about why the government is cracking down on voices of dissent and why they are imprisoning journalists, he simply said that these are not journalists. These are activists. As if being an activist is crime enough. It's crime enough for anyone to be incarcerated. That's the voice of depravity. That's the voice of decadence. That you simply say something that flies in the face of facts. The voice of decadence. And when he was asked about, the Ethiopian government outlet also spoke, another issue, spoke about um, about some people trying to smuggle, and this is really a segue to the topic of the day. They were caught while trying to smuggle fuel into Tigray. And they said that they were caught as if they were doing something wrong. Why is it that smuggling fuel, if that's what the case is, getting the fuel into Tigray considered a crime? That's a voice of callousness, complete callousness. When they know the people of Tigray need fuel for transportation, for energy, for cooking, for all kinds of things, they need fuel. But the Ethiopian government considers this a crime, a voice of callousness, and a voice, when you put these two together, a voice of complete depravity. So, with two most influential people, this week we saw the juxtaposition of evil and human goodness, and the situation prevailing in Ethiopia. This is what kind of stood out to me this week.
Thank you, Eskel. Solomon, what stood out for you this week?
Thank you. I share the sentiments of my compatriots and brothers, Faisal and Eskel. But I would like to hone on one thing regarding the famine in the Somali region, in addition to the siege in Tigray. Amartya Sen, the famous Amartya Sen, who is world expert on related to food security and famine, often say famines don't happen in open and democratic society. They happen in irresponsible, autocratic, and indifferent regimes. That's exactly what's happening in the Somali region and in Ethiopia, in Tigray. Recently, I think a few days ago, there was a coverage on how famine has been, how the world has tried put technology into use to predict and help prevent famines. FAOSNet, the famine early warning system, that was established because of the 1984-85 famine that devastated much of Tigray and part of Wollo. That system has been in place, and scientists have been working on this tirelessly. Abiy, his supporters, and even including others should know through FAOS that famine was going to happen in the Somali region. They had all the information. And yet, not only they have done nothing to prevent it, but even after it happens, they are doing very little or nothing to save lives and livestock and livelihoods. Of course, they are using food starvation to demand submission and subjugate populations, entire communities, particularly like what they are doing in Tigray, the siege. So that's a continuation of their policy. And yet the international community, the world, the EU and US fail to uphold Rule 2417, the UN 2417, that clearly dictates civilian populations have the right to access to food production, to means of access to market, to storage, to preservation, and also to food assistance. And yet the regime, Abiy regime, is violating all that, and they have not done a single thing. The worst part, which I would like to connect to, is there is this mediation effort being facilitated by Obasanjo, which Obasanjo have been shuttling between Magala, Addis, and elsewhere, trying to mediate, but which seems to prolong the suffering of the people of Tigray. I think the travesty which Scale was trying to point out, the
decadence is while a few hundred kilometers away in Somali, maybe even fewer than that, shorter than that, in Somali, people are dying, livestock are perished, livelihoods are completely devastated. He's visiting farmlands and he's attending festivities in Addis as if the country and everything is in honky dory. So it's very, very disappointing. Sorry for the background noise. And I would like to connect that to a new development where Satterfield, the previous envoy to the Horn of Africa, has been replaced by a new envoy, appointed new envoy. It's worrisome. I hope the new envoy gets a term that he would be successful than the previous ones who have been challenged by numerous developments. But I'm also a little bit worried given the stature of the new envoy and the prior experience related to Africa. Yes, he has some experience in Congo, but predominantly from Latin America, and not much in the Horn of Africa. That worries me. Even though I'm, in a way, glad that the Biden administration is engaged in this, that they felt the need to appoint an envoy, but yet not in the stature of Satterfield or other. That still continues to worry me. These were my observations. Thank you.
Thanks, Solomon. So today the topic is Tigray still and essentially part of Ethiopia? The reason for that topic is there has been reporting from government media, state media, and the way Scale was also mentioning how when they report even money or anything that goes to Tigray from any part of Ethiopia, it looks like deemed a crime. And the other part is when they report about Eritrean-Tigrayan conflict or anything, they report it as if that is happening between two countries, and Ethiopia is siding with Eritrea. One case to show that is this report from Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation, that is the largest and oldest state media in the country, where they are talking about or reporting how Eritrea is ready to defend itself from TPLF's second war or another round of war. And they give a lot of background to this reporting. So what is your take? This is, I know it's a provocative topic and question, but Faisal, what is your take on how we see that and how that ramification of treating Tigray the way it's being treated? Faisal.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to add just 2 minutes what has been said, I think my particular pain with the famine is I witnessed the 1974 famine as a young man, both in Somalia and in the Somali region, Ethiopia. And in Somalia, because of the system that Barre in his heydays had, not a single person died, and all the famine affected people were resettled and they became fishermen and farmers, and they became so productive that the regions where he resettled those people were showcased for how to develop and mitigate famine. And then as a graduate student in my second pain is UCLA in 1984. I had my first work study by working that famine mitigation in Ethiopia. We are the World Fund. So I witnessed that. And I remember the pledge and the promise was that, as Solomon was touching, that from now on we know how to mitigate impact. And then 40 years after that, we're witnessing the worst famine in Ethiopia. And indeed, famine has nothing to do with drought. It's a function of government and misgoverning the people. Having said that, I think with this topic, I also tweeted a couple of times, including yesterday, where I was responding to some tweets. And when I saw this, I basically raised the question of is Tigray part of Ethiopia or not? And I think if you pick a checkbox and create an index of what makes a given region or a given people part of a greater country, probably you would come to the conclusion that Tigray is no longer part of Ethiopia. I don't care what the international expression is of the so-called 1920s Woodrow Wilson drafted 14 points of territorial integrity of a country is, which is what governs today in the world. I think indicators will point to us that Tigray is no longer part of Ethiopia. Number one, this very picture that you see, a region of Ethiopia is involved in a very vicious bloody war for the second time with their neighboring dictator, and Ethiopia's mass media is vouching for the other country. So that tells you that Tigray is not treated as part of Ethiopia. Solomon mentioned the siege, and we have been discussing in this space so many times about the criminality of the siege of the Tigray people, not TPLF, over the people of Tigray people, who are 7 million people, 99.99% of them innocent, consisting of children, women, professionals, peasants, what have you. And the Ethiopian government sought and perpetuated a policy to kill those people by starvation. And you don't even do that to enemy that is next door. So there also, it proves to me Tigray is not part of Ethiopia as we speak. And third factor or indicator is economically. As Skial noted here, Tigray is starved to do what nations and city-states have started doing during the medieval time, which is commodity exchange through monetary system that people share. The Tigray people have been denied the right and the opportunity to do monetary exchange at the free marketplace, and the Ethiopian government excluded that citizens' right of the people of Ethiopia from, when it comes to the people of Tigray. And that also tells us Tigray is not part of Ethiopia. The only indicator that's left for me, with many, many other things that I'm not even here ready to mention, such as using rape woman, massive rape as tool to humiliate and other the people of Tigray, and also mass migration, forced mass migration, and mass depopulation, all those things that were carried during the fascist era and the Nazist era. The only thing that I see that connects Tigray to Ethiopia are only two factors, unfortunately. One is the vicious international instruments that observe territorial integrity per Wilson is 14 points, one of them, over the needs and the wishes and the safety and security of the people involved. The other one is geographical connectivity, which in itself is today an artificial, but has no meaning. If people cannot do transcontinental business, if people cannot visit, if the Tigray mother who gets stuck in Addis Ababa cannot see her aging brother who is probably dying from diabetes, if a mother cannot visit her daughter who may have a breast cancer, knowing that her daughter will die any day, there is nothing that holds the people of Tigray emotionally, morally, politically, legally to Ethiopia, except Ethiopia is more powerful and the world stands with Ethiopia and the world follows the Ethiopian footsteps. It's a tragic human story that is going, in my opinion, beyond the Tigray. It's really, and Scale touched this, it's really an indication of what is wrong with the way the world is organized. We are organized in a way that the little guy and the smaller and the masses of people who don't have big machines get usually punished. And I think it happened to us as Africans too often, but now we see happening to Europe, and we have seen how America gets up and gives our own money without asking us to the European who gets impacted, while they deny the other Ethiopian people, Tigrays, to be safeguarded by any standard, even by a very serious negotiation. So I think, in my opinion, I come to the conclusion after studying Ethiopian history, after knowing what Addis, the center, has been doing to the peripheral regions, and as a very serious student of trained center periphery student who has been writing on this issue for the last 30 years, Tigray is no longer part of Ethiopia. It's only there because that's what the forces that's out there want to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Speaking about the international community, I think there are people in Tigray that feel the government of Tigray just answering to this demand from the international community. That may be the only entity in Tigray that's treating Tigray also still as part of Ethiopia. Maybe Solomon can speak to that later. Scale, what's your take on this, on the topic? You touched it in your highlights of the week, but if you can develop that further.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get that towards the end. I think the catchphrase that the Ethiopian government, which is ostensibly the guardian or the entity, political entity responsible for the territorial integrity and protection of citizens, the way they speak about it is that what happened in Tigray was a war against the TPLF, which they defined as a terrorist organization. Never mind that the violations that the TPLF, as the government of Tigray, committed, the crimes that the TPLF committed by the standards or the charges leveled by the Ethiopian government, it's number one, refused to join the PP when the EPRDF ostensibly merged into a unified party. That should not be a crime because they chose not to be part of a party, a political party. They simply said that we're not going to subscribe to the goals in the political programs. That's not our goal. That's not our political program. So we cannot be a part of it. That's one of the first crimes. I say this because the guy that is in the Ethiopian Prime Minister's office, the guy that sits in the Prime Minister's office, described this issue once as if the TPLF had chosen to remain within the PP, it could have at least kept its own. That's what he said. It could have at least kept its own. So that was one of the crimes. The second is that they held elections. I think people should be aware of what really happened with that elections. The Tigray government conducted regional elections as required by the regional government's constitution. They did not elect representatives to the Ethiopian parliament. That issue, that distinction gets lost in the shuffle of things. That it was in the region, the self-governing region, according to the Ethiopian constitution, elected its representatives amid the threat of coronavirus, even though that was the reason why the Ethiopian government itself postponed its own elections. So that is really what the Ethiopian government says, that they are taking law enforcement measure against the TPLF. In reality, whether Tigray is part of Ethiopia now is in question because the recipients of the punishment meted out on Tigray are the people of Tigray, not TPLF. When the road was before the war, when the road to Tigray was closed off for nearly 2 years, people who suffered, not TPLF, but the Tigray people. This is before the war. When the federal government cut budget support that the Tigray, as part of Ethiopia, is entitled to, that Tigray, as part of Ethiopia, is entitled to before they conducted an election, that doesn't indicate to me that Tigray was treated even before the war, as part of Ethiopia. On the verge of the war, when Tigray was encircled by the 14 divisions of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, in association with all kinds of forces organized by the Amhara regional government, especially on the western side. The war was portrayed, this was not a law enforcement operation, but the Ethiopian military and the security forces of the Amhara region. And from the north, another country. Keep in mind that Eritrea is another country, even though it meddles in Ethiopian affairs as it wishes, with impunity. When it was encircled, it didn't seem to me that Tigray was part of Ethiopia. It didn't seem to me that it was considered a domestic affair, that one region coalesces all of its forces, the Ethiopian government rounds up all of its forces against one region. That did not tell me that this was part of Ethiopia. This is on the verge of the war. When the war started, the genocide, and that word is what should be used, the genocide that was used against the people of Tigray. And people who died, and this is really what incensed me about Ethiopia all the time. The people that worked for Ethiopia, like Seyum Mesfin, he worked for Ethiopia as foreign minister. You can disagree with him on all kinds of things. You can ask for his resignation or giving up government position. You could do that, but to put a bullet through his head and throwing away his body in the ravines of Tigray, that did not tell me that Ethiopia really treats people who worked for the Ethiopian government as part of Ethiopia. Now, at the end of the war was portrayed as comparable to Adwa, that this was Ethiopia's victory against its own its mortal enemy. Tigray was the mortal enemy, that Africa should be rounded up to celebrate that Ethiopia attained victory. That didn't tell me that Tigray was part of Ethiopia. And now, after the war, if you look at from technical grounds, perspectives, Tigray is not connected to the network, the grid with Ethiopia, even though it was before. And the banking system, Tigray is dislocated, detached from the banking system in Ethiopia. The currency system is smuggled into Ethiopia, doesn't work in Tigray. The Ethiopian government doesn't pay its own employees, federal employees in Tigray. Infrastructure in Tigray is left to waste. That doesn't tell me from the technical standpoint that Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Politically and administratively, Tigray is not represented in Ethiopia's parliament. Tigray has no representatives, no elected representative in the Ethiopian government, in the Ethiopian parliament, no representatives in the governing bodies of Ethiopia, not in the military, not in anything. In fact, people of Tigrayan descent who live in Ethiopia are not treated as if they are citizens of Ethiopia. They are treated as enemy collaborators, fifth columnists in Ethiopia. All of that doesn't tell me that politically and administratively speaking, Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Institutionally, if you look at it right now, the churches, the three main churches in Tigray have now declared their independence from their mother churches or their sister churches in Ethiopia, the Orthodox, the Catholic, and the Protestants. The mosques or the Muslims had also declared their independence for good reasons. Remember what happened during the war with them. Now, there is, as Faisal was saying, what matters in all of this is the sense of belonging. That Tigrayans actually feel a sense of belonging to Ethiopia, but that emotional connection has been severed. No Tigrayan can see themselves as being part of Ethiopia at all, for good reasons. If you listen to the rhetoric from the Ethiopian side, it doesn't look like, and that's what I was saying earlier, it doesn't look like the Ethiopian government is treating Tigray as part of Ethiopia. First, it invited mercenaries, another government, to fight its own citizens. And now with their rhetoric, including the top level, the guy that is in the prime minister's office, including considering Tigray cancer, considering Tigray weeds. What do you do with weeds except uproot them? What do you do with cancer except excise it from the body? There is nothing that makes me believe when they speak in their terms of their rhetoric and their discourse. Ethiopian government, high-ranking Ethiopian government officials, when they say we have to erase from memory, from consciousness, and from conscience anything, any vestiges of Tigray from ours, that doesn't tell me that Tigray is part of Ethiopia. Maybe technically for legal reasons it is, but for all of these reasons that I mentioned, I cannot imagine that Tigray is part of Ethiopia, and I cannot imagine that it will remain part of Ethiopia, but that's another matter.
Thank you, Oskel. Solomon, you have, I know you have had an opportunity to see what activists, the youth, or political parties in Tigray have been saying and are doing, and you can speak to that subject matter as well. So, what is your take?
I share again the sentiments reflected by both Faisal and Zkel. All these facts, they have laid it out, and all the superb analysis they have put. So I don't have much to add on that. There are other elements that I would like to bring to probably highlight evidences that support functionally, operationally, the relationship between Tigray and the Abiy, the Ethiopia of Abiy, is completely severed. The year before, in the prior year, there was one remaining item that procurement actually that connected the people of Tigray with the Abiy administration. That was when the administration buys fertilizers, it procures for the entire country. This year, while they are moving rhetorically for the international community, putting a facade that they are a responsible administration, they consider Tigray part of Ethiopia. This is a law and order. This should be resolved with a national dialogue and the framework that they have put in place, considering Tigray a state within the domains of Ethiopia. And yet, they completely removed Tigray from the procurement of the for fertilizer. While the demand was put in place from the Tigray side, the Abiy regime decided to cut off millions of farmers of Tigray from having to access fertilizers. So, in all practical purposes, it's not just because the people of Tigray have felt the need that they don't anymore belong to the current Ethiopia we see, but the Abiy regime and its supporters are doing everything to make sure Tigray is not part of Ethiopia. So it looks mutual. I don't know what the motive is for Abiy, even though he's trying a lot of acrobats and theatrics to draw the attention or get support from the European Union, from the US and African Union. In all practical purposes, is doing everything to make sure the relationship between the center and the periphery, particularly Tigray, is cut off. We have several thousand more than 80,000 pensioners in Tigray who have paid decades of their hard-earned money and saved it in the national coffers in this difficult time, in their twilight years, when they are supposed to have access to these funds to feed, shelter, take care of their health. They don't have access to those funds. We can cite a number of other examples. So the siege, denying access to food assistance, to medicine, completely cutting off from the fertilizer procurement, so the people of Tigray starve today. They don't produce enough. These 360 siege, functionally and operationally, Tigray is no more part of Ethiopia. When you look at the sentiments of the people of Tigray, since this came in a complete shock, you would expect a significant majority to still have feelings for Ethiopia. The sad fact is, the tragic fact is, just to be conservative and to leave some room for doubt, there may be a percentage or two who may have still some feelings, residual feelings for the Ethiopia old, for the Ethiopia they got from their parents and generationally. They feel attachment to. You can say more than 99%, particularly the youth and those who are under 40, don't want anything to do with the name Ethiopia and anything with Ethiopia. You can say 100%, nobody wants anything to do with the Abiy Ethiopia. Normally, when such kind of feelings develop, they take decades. But because of what has happened to Tigray, the genocide, the impact, the effect of genocide, this has developed within a very short period of time and engulfed the entire population. So much so, when the government of Tigray is trying to juggle between walking the mediation, international diplomacy, the politics of the whole, and catering to pressures from the US and EU, they know they are antagonizing with their constituents, the feeling of their constituents. You can see the choice of words they use, particularly when they mention the referendum, that they played peekaboo. Because they know in the heart of their heart, the people of Tigray, and particularly those under 50, don't want anything to do with Ethiopia. This is the development. Functionally, operationally, it has been severely cut off.
Thank you, Solomon. So that takes us to the final toast section. But with that as well, Faisal and everyone, I want you to address the issue of what would be the ramification. It looks like you are in agreement that for all practical reasons, Tigray is not treated as part of Ethiopia, and maybe from Tigray's side, there is a feeling that TPLF, the ruling party, is maybe the only entity that is trying to strike a balance, or at least diplomatically presenting it that way, and so on. So what would be the ramification of that in what could play out both in Tigray and other regions of Ethiopia. Faisal, and your final thoughts with that as well.
Yeah, no, I think this is the final thought. And I mean, probably this would require another session of its own. Now that we established the case for Tigray not being a part of Ethiopia for all practical purposes, no matter how you look at it, the question is, where do you go from here, and what is the road ahead of us? That's really the point. And in my opinion, the first thing that pops up for me is our other colleague Yosef always touched this. Is there a room, and Solomon touched, he kept saying the Abiy, the Ethiopia of Abiy, which really capsulates the issue of, can the Tigray question at this juncture be negotiated with Abiy? Let's leave other people who are not Abiy, but can Abiy be a transformative individual to resolve his own mess at this particular time? And I would say it would be very difficult to answer for me, but I think from what we said and what we discussed, and how the chanting and the songs and the rhetorics that's coming from the Tigray population indicates, also on top of that, the war in Oromo, Abiy may not be the person who will carry that day. I think Abiy may be part of the problem, and everything that relegated Tigray, which I consider until recently the center of Amhara Tigray historical, if you will, alliance that really created partly the so-called Ethiopia. If that is broken, and if Abiy is now the one who broke that by virtue of his policies and by virtue of his genocidal policies towards Tigray, can he be the transitional person? And I think that's no. If that's the case, is that how does TPLF, TDF sees the case? Is there behind the scene conversation between TDF and Ola and other people to, sort of avert and also eliminate the current situation and create a scenario for possibly talking the way out, whether that way out is, Tigray out, or Tigray putting other things on the proposal, something that the public can chew on and understand. At this point in time, we don't have that. What we do have is what's on the ground. The fact that Tigray has been designated as Ethiopia's cancer, a weed to be taken out, Tigray that has been killed in the thousands by politically designated and designed siege, all those on the table, and the very fact that the person who designed this is also running, I don't see the room for a way out, except Abiy to give another Ethiopian a chance to at least start talks, not to bring Tigray. I don't think we are in the position where we say, can you bring Tigray? As with the Somalis, after 100 years of nothing but massacre and siege that we are talking about for Tigray today, Somalis have been seeing this, and it's documented by travelers, by Somalis, by everybody. The last 150 years, Somalis have experienced this non-stop. They can bring anybody to rule Somalis or govern Somalis. They can talk to the West. They can talk to Britain, who dislocated Somalis, but they can never win the heart of the Somalis the way the geography of Ethiopia exists today. Let nobody lie to you. There is nobody probably who is privy about this than us and me and my family and everybody. It's just that the very system that created the current hearts of the Somali, which is nothing but Ethiopian, anything but Ethiopian, cannot be recaptured the same way it has been. The same with Tigray. The very person who dislocated and broke down the Tigray heart cannot reconstruct. So one, is there a proposal to bring another person who can start the negotiation? And B, what are those negotiations that Tigray and other Ethiopians are talking about, and what are the issues beyond, bringing the electricity, beyond reopening the banks? Those are remedial, immediate issues that can never go into the hearts of broken hearts of the people of Tigray, or even Somalis, or even now Oromos, as it's developing. Precondition, maybe Abiy has outlived his time, so he may need to consider, and where can we find another leader or leaderess that can at least start baby steps to open up the doors for talks. Talks can land us anywhere. They can probably lead us to heal the problems. They can probably, bring solutions to the most egregious problem versus the, because there are people who don't have the issue that Tigray has today, or Somalis may have, So I think the door can be opened with the Abiy's factor, and I don't see that now in the horizon. So we are
Uh, can you hear us, Faisal? You are
yeah.
going.
I'm sorry to paint that dark picture, but yes, unless you're asking me another thing.
Okay, thanks. No, I thought it was discontinued. Scale, final thoughts and your take on the ramifications.
I think the ramifications must be rooted in the nature of what happened in Tigray. In the speech that two speeches that, well, the speech that this Dr. Timnit raised, she tried to put the war in perspective, where she talked about the death toll that is occurred in Tigray compared to the civilian death in Ukraine. Um, Now, one of the things that the world needs to understand, and I fully concur with what Faisal said, there is no remedy from within Ethiopia as long as Abiy Ahmed is in the prime minister's office. As long as he is the undisputed ruler of the Prosperity Party, and who considers Ethiopia his patrimony, that he could do anything to it. As long as he is there, there is no solution that could be anticipated from within the country. That must be clear. The reason that I say this is that the war in Tigray, which of course in my perspective is started in other places but culminated in Tigray, is one of the longest and the longest sieges by Ethiopian Eritrean forces in world history. One of the longest sieges, at least in the 20th century. The longest, and I've spoken about this before, the longest siege in the 20th century is the Sarajevo, which lasted about 1400 days. The next longest is the siege of Madrid, which besieged for about 913 days. The third longest is the siege of Leningrad, which lasted about 869 days. The Tigray War, and this is the world needs to know, today, by my calculation, today is the 561 days. That makes us the fourth longest siege, the longest siege in the last 100 years. That should be significant. And Dr. Chiminiti says what happens in Tigray is going to knock on everybody's door. Not that Tigray's issues comes in, but if you are making peace with evil, what you would get in Europe itself is Ukraine. What you will get is Munich. That's what you'll get if you want to live with evil. But this is what happened in Tigray. In terms of the siege, it's the fourth longest. In terms of the human toll, it's about 500,000, the human death toll. If you compare that with the Russian-Ukrainian war today, is about a total of 30,000 dead. If you compare it with the Ethiopian-Eritrean war of 1998-2000, where 80,000 people died, the Yemen Houthi death toll is about 234,000. The Sudanese civil war is about 400 dead. The Tigray war, but this is thousand makes it one of the deadliest wars in the recent history of Africa. That is what the world needs to know. My point, so that I not get lost in this, there is no remedy. There is no salvation for Ethiopia from within Ethiopia, as long as this man is in the prime minister's office. But what is happening under his rule, on his watch, is the fourth longest siege, the deadliest in the recent history, or the deadliest war in the. And if you look at the death toll in terms of percentages, the Tigray war now starts in terms of percentages of the human the population in Tigray. At the start of the war, 14% have died in this war. 14%. If you compare this, one of the deadliest wars in the 20th century, the Soviet Union lost about 17 million people, and that was only 15%. That was 15% of the pre-war total population of Russia. Germany lost about 9 million or 11% of its population at the start of the war, at the end of the war, compared to the pre-war German population. The Tigray war is 14%, so it stands between the Soviet Union's loss and Germany's loss. That's not easy for the world to understand. This is not easy. This is not a joke. The Tigray war is a total war. It doesn't distinguish between non-combatants and combatants. People who died in Tigray are mostly non-combatants because it just doesn't distinguish. It was meant to destroy. It was genocide. The infrastructure, the factories, the economic installations, everything that Tigray had was destroyed. The world cannot simply watch this and turn its back. It cannot. It will come and knock at the door. And it has started to knock at the door in Ukraine. No solution can be anticipated from within Ethiopia for this kind of catastrophic, even calamitous occurrence. There isn't. It's only from outside. Now, I'll say this and finish. We started with this idea of Tigray effectively a part of Ethiopia, and we made that from institutional, political, and administrative, from all kinds of perspectives that it is not in. It's not only Tigray now. The Somali region doesn't seem to be a part. It doesn't seem to be a part of Ethiopia. It's only needed when they seek support for their deadliest war against Tigray. At other times, it could fend for itself. During times of famine, it could fend for itself. The Somali region of Ethiopia. And let me add this to this. The Somali region has never been considered an effective part of Ethiopia, but now it is being pushed out of Ethiopia. You lose Tigray in the north, you lose Tigray, Somali region in the east. The situation in Oromia is untenable. So this is not really an issue of Tigray as part of Ethiopia. The question that the world should ponder is Ethiopia, that can the center hold in Ethiopia? Is Ethiopia a viable political entity and is worthy of saving? That's the question the world should ask itself.
That last question, I think, would be something that we should also get back in this panel. Solomon, the final parting words is yours.
Thank you. It's tragic recounting the tragedy, the suffering that has befallen Tigray, Somali, Oromia, and the rest, and the international community trying to salvage a region that is also the source of all this problem. What's very disheartening and disappointing is how they see Abiy as the worst case scenario as a force to be a partner in resolving the issue, and in a rosy picture as someone who may be able to hold the empire together, which absolutely defies logic, defies the reality on the ground. So the Ethiopia we see now The Ethiopia of Abiy, what we see now, is completely crumbling. In all senses, economic, political, state, it's an absolute failure. The last time we had multiple famines, restive states, raging war in Tigray, in Eritrea, in Somali, in Oromia, was during Mengistu Haile Mariam. And we know the story. It ended up in disaster and complete collapse. EPRDF came to save a fractured nation. And 30 years later, back to square one, in a much, much worse situation. So Abiy, who is responsible, soaked in blood, who have brought all this pain and suffering and loss and destruction, cannot be a partner and is not a force to patch. If really the interest of African Union, European Union, African Union seems to support this notion that they need to hold together this fractured nation, fractured empire and collapsing, and pushing on or appealing, begging the US and European Union to help with this project, and including on their own, the US and international communities, agencies, if they have any sense at all to keep this together, they need to recognize the source of all this problem, particularly over the last few years, who have completely exasperated, used state resources to decimate the country, state public resources, picked fight everywhere, used the army to decimate itself. Cannot be the person responsible for putting it back together. So I concur with Faisal. Even the notion of resuming talks, the possibility, even if a dissolution is inevitable, which is serious, you want to do it peacefully, because we will continue to live as neighbors. We'll be required to have a mutual peaceful existence. Even for that kind of arrangement, for that kind of dissolution, you need someone sensible to be in the picture. So I think if they are listening, State Department, National Security, and others, if they are really listening to this, they have to seriously consider their position, their current position. They have to make an immediate adjustment and adapt to the reality in the ground before things go completely haywire and they have nowhere to hold into. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone. It was a great and insightful conversation as usual. So we will, this is to be continued. Thank you for your time and good night from here.
Thank you, everyone.
You have been following us live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. This was the weekly H panel. Today's topic was, is Tigray still and effectively part of Ethiopia? The unanimous answer was no. And the panelists were excellently arguing why that was a no. And this is a big topic to be explored more, and the bigger picture of Ethiopia as well. Your host was Getachew Asefa. Thanks for tuning. And tomorrow we'll have a Tigrinya show with Haile Kabada. And Haile Kabada is the Foreign Affairs Committee or Foreign Affairs head of Salsai Wayana, an opposition party in Tigray. Because it's in Tigrinya, I should say it in Tigrinya as well. ህሉ ኩነታት ትግራይን መዋፅቱን ምስ ሃይሉ ከበደ ፅባሕ 4 p.m. Eastern Time ላይቭ ክንዘራረብ ኢና ምሳይሉ ከበደ ነዋግዐሉ 38 ገጽ ዝኾነ ሰነድ ሳልሳይ ወያነ ዘዳለዎ ኣሎ ሁሉ ኩነታት ትግራይን ዶክመንት ባዕሉ ሁሉ ኩነታት ስግርን ሕውየትን ትግራይ ዝብል ኣብ ጥሪ 2014 ኣቆፃፅራ ግዕዝ ዝወፀ ኣሎ ሳልሳይ ወያነ ትግራይ ዘውፅኦ ብኡ መሰረት ጌርና ካብ ባዕለይን ካብ ተመልከትን ዘለው ሕቶታት ክንዕልል ኢና ሁሉ ኩነታት ትግራይን መዋፅቱን ምሳይሉ ከበደ ፅባሕ 4 p.m. Eastern Time ስለዚ ተሓተትኩምና ንመስገን have a good night